Mother Holle. From Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Andrews. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. Once upon a time there was a widow who had 2 daughters. One of them was beautiful and industrious, the other ugly and lazy. The mother, however, loved the ugly and lazy one best, because she was her own daughter, and so the other, who was only her step-daughter, was made to do all the work of the house, and was quite the Cinderella of the family. Her step-mother sent her out every day to sit by the well in the high road, there to spin until she made her fingers bleed. Now it chanced one day that some blood fell on to the spindle, and as the girl stopped over the well to wash it off, the spindle suddenly sprang out of her hand and fell into the well. She ran home crying to tell of her misfortune, but her step-mother spoke harshly to her, and after giving her a violent scolding, said unkindly, "As you have let the spindle fall into the well, you may go yourself and fetch it out." The girl went back to the well, not knowing what to do, and at last, in her distress, she jumped into the water after the spindle. She remembered nothing more until she awoke and found herself in a beautiful meadow, full of sunshine, and with countless flowers blooming in every direction. She walked over the meadow, and presently she came upon a baker's oven full of bread, and the loaves cried out to her, "Take us out! Take us out, or alas, we shall be burnt to a cinder. We were baked through long ago." So she took the bread-shovel and drew them all out. She went on a little farther, till she came to a tree full of apples. "Shake me, I pray," cried the tree. "My apples, one and all, are ripe." So she shook the tree, and the apples came falling down upon her like rain. But she continued shaking until there was not a single apple left upon it. Then she carefully gathered in the apples together in a heap, and walked on again. The next thing she came to was a little house, and there she saw an old woman looking out, with such large teeth that she was terrified, and turned to run away, but the old woman called after her, "What are you afraid of, dear child? Stay with me. If you will do the work of my house properly for me, I will make you very happy. You must be very careful, however, to make my bed in the right way, for I wish you always to shake it so thoroughly, so that the feathers fly about. Then, they say, down there in the world, that it is snowing, for I am Mother Holle." The old woman spoke so kindly that the girl summoned up courage and agreed to enter into her service. She took care to do everything according to the old woman's bidding, and every time she made the bed she shook it with all her might, so that the feathers flew about like so many snowflakes. The old woman was as good as her word. She never spoke angrily to her, and gave her roast and boiled meats every day. So she stayed on with Mother Holle for some time, and then she began to grow unhappy. She could not at first tell why she felt sad, but she became conscious at last of great longing to go home. Then she knew she was homesick, although she was 1,000 times better off with Mother Holle than with her mother and sister. After waiting a while, she went to Mother Holle and said, "I am so homesick that I cannot stay with you any longer, for although I am so happy here, I must return to my own people." Then Mother Holle said, "I am pleased that you should want to go back to your own people, and as you have served me so well and faithfully, I will take you home myself." Thereupon she led the girl by the hand up to a broad gateway. The gate was opened, and as the girl passed through, a shower of gold fell upon her, and the gold clung to her, so that she was covered with it from head to foot. And as she spoke, she handed her the spindle which she had dropped into the well. The gate was then closed, and the girl found herself back in the old world, close to her mother's house. As she entered the courtyard, the rooster, who was perched on the well, called out, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your golden daughter's come back to you." Then she went to her mother and sister, and as she was so richly covered with gold, they gave her a warm welcome. She related to them all that had happened, and when the mother heard how she had come by her great riches, she thought she should like her ugly lazy daughter to go and try her fortune. So she made the sister go and sit by the well and spin, and the girl pricked her finger and thrust her hand into a thorn bush, so that she might drop some blood onto the spindle. Then she threw it into the well, and jumped in herself. Like her sister, she awoke in the beautiful meadow, and walked over it till she came to the oven. "Take us out! Take us out! Or, alas, we shall be burnt to a cinder! We were baked through long ago," cried the loaves as before. But the lazy girl answered, "Do you think I'm going to dirty my hands for you?" and walked on. Presently she came to the apple-tree. "Shake me, I pray! My apples, one and all, are ripe," it cried. But she only answered, "A nice thing to ask me to do! One of the apples might fall on my head," and passed on. At last she came to Mother Holly's house, and as she had heard all about the large teeth from her sister, she was not afraid of them, and engaged herself without delay to the old woman. The first day she was very obedient and industrious, and exerted herself to please Mother Holly, for she thought of the gold she would get in return. The next day, however, she began to dawdle over her work, and the third day she was more idle still. Then she began to lie in bed in the mornings, and refused to get up. Worse still, she neglected to make the old woman's bed properly, and forgot to shake it so that the feathers might fly about. So Mother Holly very soon got tired of her, and told her she might go. The lazy girl was delighted at this, and thought to herself, "The gold will soon be mine." Mother Holly led her, as she had led her sister, to the broad gateway. But as she was passing through, instead of a shower of gold, a great bucketful of pitch came pouring over her. "That is in return for your services," said the old woman, and shut the gate. So the lazy girl had to go home covered with pitch, and the rooster on the wall called out as he saw her, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your dirty daughter's come back to you." But try what she would, she could not get the pitch off, and it stuck to her as long as she lived. End of Mother Holly. Little Red Riding Hood. From Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. Once upon a time there was a dear little girl who was loved by every one who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say 'Good morning,' and don't peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Little Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said he. "Thank you kindly, Wolf." "Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely must know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature! What a nice plump mouthful! She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily, so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood, and then he said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look around? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the world is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." And so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. And whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door.
"Who is there?"
"Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door."
"Lift the latch," cried out the grandmother. "I am too weak, and cannot get up."
The wolf lifted the latch, the door sprang open, and without saying a word he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother, and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel to-day! And at other times I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer. So she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled far over her face, and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have!" "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But, grandmother, what big eyes you have!" she said. "The better to see you with, my dear." "But, grandmother, what large hands you have!" "The better to hug you with." "Oh, but, grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have!" "The better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Little Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house, and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring! I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find you here, you old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought you." Then, just as he was going to fire at him, It occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved, so he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the Little Red Riding Hood shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf's!" And after that the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Little Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched great stones with which to fill the wolf's belly, and when he awoke he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he collapsed at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Little Red Riding Hood had brought, and revived. But Little Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so." It was also related that once, when Little Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her, and tried to entice her from the path. Little Red Riding Hood, however, was on her guard, and went straight forward on her way, and told her grandmother that she had met the wolf, and that he had said good morning to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes, that if they had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up. "Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, that he may not come in." Soon afterwards the wolf knocked, and cried, "Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Riding Hood, and am bringing you some cakes." But they did not speak, or open the door. So the greybeard stole twice or thrice around the house, and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Little Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, so she said to the child, "Take the pail, Little Red Riding Hood. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Little Red Riding Hood carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of the sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far that he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough, and was drowned. But Little Red Riding Hood went joyously home, and no one ever did anything to harm her again. End of Little Red Riding Hood. Bridegroom, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. There once was a miller who had one beautiful daughter, and as she was grown up, he was anxious that she should be well married and provided for. He said to himself, "I will give her to the first suitable man who comes and asks for her hand." Not long after a suitor appeared, and as he appeared to be very rich, and the miller could see nothing in him with which to find fault, he betrothed his daughter to him. But the girl did not care for the man as a girl ought to care for her betrothed husband, and she could not look at him nor think of him without an inward shudder. One day he said to her, "You have not paid me a visit, although we have been betrothed for some time." "I do not know where your house is," she answered. "My house is out there in the dark forest," he said. She tried to excuse herself by saying that she would not be able to find the way thither. Her betrothed only replied, "You must come and see me next Sunday. I have already invited guests for that day, and that you might not mistake the way, I will strew ashes along the path." When Sunday came, and it was time for the girl to start, a feeling of dread came over her which she could not explain, and that she might not be able to find her path again, She filled her pockets with peas and lentils to sprinkle on the ground as she went along. On reaching the entrance to the forest, she found the path strewed with ashes, and these she followed, throwing down some peas on either side of her at every step she took. She walked the whole day until she came to the deepest, darkest part of the forest. There she saw a lonely house, looking so grim and mysterious that it did not please her at all. She stepped inside, but not a soul was to be seen, and a great silence reigned throughout. Suddenly a voice cried, "Turn back, young maiden fair! Linger not in this murderer's lair!" The girl looked up, and saw that the voice came from a bird hanging in a cage on the wall. Again it cried, turn back, young maiden fair! Linger not in this murderer's lair!" The girl passed on, going from room to room of the house, but they were all empty, and still she saw no one. At last she came to the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman, who could not keep her head from shaking. "Can you tell me," asked the girl, "if my betrothed husband lives here?" "Ah, you poor child!" answered the old woman. "What a place for you to come to! This is a murderer's den. You think yourself a promised bride, and that your marriage will soon take place, but it is with death that you will keep your marriage feast. Look, do you see that large cauldron of water which I am obliged to keep on the fire? As soon as they have you in their power, they will kill you without mercy, and cook and eat you, for they are eaters of men. If I did not take pity on you and save you, you would be lost." Thereupon the old woman led her behind a large cask, which quite hid her from view. "Keep as still as a mouse," she said. "Do not move or speak, or it will be all over with you. To-night, when the robbers are all asleep, we will flee together. I have long been waiting for an opportunity to escape." The words were hardly out of her mouth when the godless crew returned, dragging another girl along with them. They were all drunk, and paid no heed to her cries and lamentations. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow, and with that her heart gave way, and she died. Then they tore off her dainty clothing, laid her on a table, and cut her beautiful body into pieces, and sprinkled salt upon it. The poor betrothed girl crouched trembling and shuddering behind the cask, for she saw what a terrible fate had been intended for her by the robbers. One of them now noticed a gold ring still remaining on the little finger of the murdered girl, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took a hatchet and cut off the finger. But the finger sprang into the air, and fell behind the cask into the lap of the girl who was hiding there. The robber took a light and began looking for it, but he could not find it. "Have you looked behind the large cask?" said one of the others. But the old woman called out, "Come and eat your suppers, and let the thing be till to-morrow. The finger won't run away." "The old woman is right," said the robbers, and they ceased looking for the finger and sat down. The old woman then mixed a sleeping draught with their wine, and before long they were all lying on the floor of the cellar, fast asleep and snoring. As soon as the girl was assured of this, she came from behind the cask. She was obliged to step over the bodies of the sleepers, who were lying close together, and every moment she was filled with renewed dread lest she should awaken them. But God helped her, so that she passed safely over them. And then she and the old woman went upstairs, opened the door, and hastened as fast as they could from the murderer's den. They found the ashes scattered by the wind, but the peas and lentils had sprouted, had grown sufficiently above the ground to guide them in the moonlight along the path. All night long they walked, and it was morning before they reached the mill. Then the girl told her father all that had happened. the day came that had been fixed for the marriage. The bridegroom arrived, and also a large company of guests, for the miller had taken care to invite all his friends and relations. As they sat at the feast, each guest in turn was asked to tell a tale. The bride sat still, and did not say a word. "And you, my love," said the bridegroom, turning to her, "is there no tale you know? Tell us something." "I will tell you a dream, then," said the bride. "I went alone through a forest, and came at last to a house. Not a soul could I find within, but a bird that was hanging in a cage on the wall cried, 'Turn back, young maiden fair, linger not in this murderer's lair.' And again a second time it said these words. My darling, this is only a dream. I went on through the house from room to room, but they were all empty, and everything was so grim and mysterious. At last I went down to the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman, who could not keep her head still. I asked her if my betrothed lived there, and she answered, 'Oh, you poor child, you are come to a murderer's den. Your betrothed does indeed live here, but he will kill you without mercy, and afterwards cook and eat you.' My darling, this is only a dream." The old woman hid me behind a large cask, and scarcely had she done this when the robbers returned home, dragging a young girl along with them. They gave her 3 kinds of wine to drink, white, red, and yellow, and with that she died. My darling, this is only a dream. Then they tore off her dainty clothing, and cut her beautiful body into pieces, and sprinkled salt upon it. My darling, this is only a dream. And one of the robbers saw that there was a gold ring still left on her finger, and as it was difficult to draw off, he took a hatchet and cut off her finger. But the finger sprang into the air, and fell behind the great cask into my lap. And here is the finger with the ring." And with these words the bride drew forth the finger, and showed it to the assembled guests. The bridegroom, who during this recital had grown deadly pale, up and tried to escape, but the guests seized him and held him fast. They delivered him up to justice, and he and all his murderous band were condemned to death for their wicked deeds. End of The Robber Bridegroom. From Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. A poor woodman sat in his cottage one night, smoking his pipe by the fireside, while his wife sat by his side, spinning. "How lonely it is, wife," said he, as he puffed out a long curl of smoke, "for you and me to sit here by ourselves, without any children to play about and amuse us, while other people seem so happy and merry with their children." "What you say is very true," said the wife, sighing and turning round her wheel. "How happy should I be if I had but one child! If it were ever so small, yea, if it were no bigger than my thumb, I should be very happy and love it dearly." Now, odd as you may think it, it came to pass that this good woman's wish was fulfilled just in the very way she had wished it, for, not long afterwards, she had a little boy, who was quite healthy and strong, but was not much bigger than my thumb. So they said, "Well, we cannot say we have not got what we wished for, and little as he is, we will love him dearly." And they called him Thomas Thumb. They gave him plenty of food, yet for all they could do he never grew bigger, but kept just the same size as he had been when he was born. Still his eyes were sharp and sparkling, and he soon showed himself to be a clever little fellow, who always knew well what he was about. One day, as the woodman was getting ready to go into the wood to cut fuel, he said, "I wish I had some one to bring the cart after me, for I want to make haste." "Oh, father," cried Tom. "I will take care of that. The cart shall be in the wood by the time you want it." Then the woodman laughed, and said, "How can that be? You cannot reach up to the horse's bridle." "Never mind that, father," said Tom. "If my mother will only harness the horse, I will get into his ear, and tell him which way to go." "Well," said the father, "we will try for once." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse to the cart, and put Tom into his ear. And as he sat there, the little man told the beast how to go, crying out, "Go on!" and "Stop!" as he wanted. And thus the horse went on just as well as if the woodman had driven it himself into the wood. It happened that as the horse was going a little too fast, and Tom was calling out, "Gently, gently," two strangers came up. "What an odd thing that is," said one. "There is a cart going along, and I hear a carter talking to the horse, but yet I can see no one." "That is queer indeed," said the other. "Let us follow the cart and see where it goes." So they went on into the wood, till at last they came to the place where the woodman was. Then Tom Thumb, seeing his father, cried out, "See, father, here I am with the cart, all right and safe. Now take me down." So his father took hold of the horse with one hand, and with the other took his son out of the horse's ear, and put him down upon a straw, where he sat as merry as you please. The two strangers were all this time looking on, and did not know what to say for wonder. At last one took the other aside, and said, "That little urchin will make our fortune, if we can get him and carry him about from town to town as a show. We must buy him." So they went up to the woodman, and asked him what he would take for the little man. "He will be better off," said they, "with us than with you." "I won't sell him at all," said the father. "My own flesh and blood is dearer to me than all the silver and gold in the world." But Tom, hearing of the bargain they wanted to make, crept up his father's coat to his shoulder, and whispered in his ear, "Take the money, father, and let them have me. I'll soon come back to you." So the woodman at last said he would sell Tom to the strangers for a large piece of gold, and they paid the price. "Where would you like to sit?" said one of them. "Oh, put me on the rim of your hat. That will be a nice gallery for me. I can walk about there, and see the country as we go along." So they did as he wished, and when Tom had taken leave of his father, they took him away with them. They journeyed on till it began to be dusky, and then the little man said, "Let me get down. I'm tired." So the man took off his hat, and put him down on a clod of earth in a ploughed field by the side of the road. But Tom ran about amongst the furrows, and at last slipped into an old mouse-hole. "Good night, my masters," said he. "I'm off. Mind and look sharp after me the next time." Then they ran at once to the place, and poked the ends of their sticks into the mouse-hole, but all in vain. Tom only crawled farther and farther in, and at last it became quite dark, so that they were forced to go their way without their prize, as sulky as could be. When Tom found they were gone, he came out of his hiding-place. "What dangerous walking it is," said he, "in this ploughed field! If I were to fall from one of these great clods, I should undoubtedly break my neck." At last, by good luck, he found a large empty snail-shell. "This is lucky," said he. "I can sleep here very well," and in he crept. Just as he was falling asleep, he heard two men passing by, chatting together, and one said to the other, "How can we rob that rich parson's house of his silver and gold?" "I'll tell you," cried Tom. "What noise was that?" said the thief, frightened. "I'm sure I heard some one speak." They stood listening, and Tom said,
Take me with you, and I'll soon show you how to get the parson's money. But where are you? Said they. Look about on the ground, answered he, and listen where the sound comes from. At last the thieves found him out, and lifted him up in their hands. You little urchin, they said, what can you do for us? Why, I can get between the iron window bars of the parson's house, and throw you out whatever you want. That's a good thought, said the thieves. Come along, we shall see what you can do. When they came to the parson's house, Tom slipped through the window bars into the room, and then called out as loud as he could bawl, Will you have all that is here? At this the thieves were frightened, and said, Softly, softly, speak low, that you may not awaken anybody. But Tom seemed as if he did not understand them, and bawled out again, How much will you have? Shall I throw it all out? Now the cook lay in the next room, and hearing a noise, she raised herself up in her bed and listened. Meantime the thieves were frightened, and ran off a little way. But at last they plucked up their hearts, and said, This little urchin is only trying to make fools of us. So they came back, and whispered softly to him, saying, Now let us have no more of your roguish jokes, but throw us out some of the money. Then Tom called out as loud as he could, Very well, hold your hands, here it comes. The cook heard this quite plain, so she sprang out of her bed and ran to the open door. The thieves ran off as if a wolf was at their tails, and the maid, having groped about and found nothing, went away for a light. By the time she came back, Tom had slipped off into the barn, and when she looked about and searched every hole and corner and found nobody, she went to bed, thinking she must have been dreaming with her eyes open. The little man crawled about in the hay-loft, and at last found a snug place to finish his night's rest in. So he laid himself down, meaning to sleep till daylight, and then find his way home to his father and mother. But, alas, how woefully he was undone! What crosses and sorrows happen to us all in this world! The cook got up early, before daybreak, to feed the cows, and going straight to the hayloft, carried away a large bundle of hay, with the little man in the middle of it, fast asleep. He still, however, slept on, and did not awake till he found himself in the mouth of a cow, for the cook had put the hay into the cow's rick, and the cow had taken Tom up in a mouthful of it. "Good lack-a-day!" said he, "how came I to tumble into the mill?" But he soon found out where he really was, and was forced to have all his wits about him, that he might not get between the cow's teeth, and so be crushed to death. At last down he went into her stomach. "It is rather dark," said he. "They forgot to build windows in this room to let the sun in. A candle would be no bad thing." Though he made the best of his bad luck, he did not like his quarters at all, and the worst of it was, that more and more hay was always coming down, and the space left for him became smaller and smaller. At last he cried out as loud as he could, "Don't bring me any more hay!" The maid happened to be just then milking the cow, and hearing some one speak, but seeing nobody, and yet being quite sure it was the same voice that she had heard in the night, she was so frightened that she fell off her stool, and overset the milk-pail. As soon as she could pick herself up out of the dirt, she ran off as fast as she could to her master, the parson, and said, "Sir, sir, the cow is talking." But the parson said, "Woman, thou art surely mad." However, he went with her into the cow-house to try and see what was the matter. Scarcely had he set foot on the threshold, when Tom called out, "Don't bring me any more hay." Then the parson himself was frightened, and thinking the cow was surely bewitched,
told his man to kill her on the spot. So the cow was killed and cut up, and the stomach in which Tom lay was thrown out upon a dunghill. Tom soon set himself to work to get out, which was not a very easy task. But at last, just as he had made room to get his head out, fresh ill luck befell him. A hungry wolf sprang out, and swallowed up the whole stomach with Tom in it at one gulp, and ran away. Tom, however, was still not disheartened, and thinking the wolf would not dislike having some chat with him as he was going along, he called out, "My good friend, I can show you a famous treat." "Where's that?" said the wolf. "In such and such a house," said Tom, describing his own father's house. "You can crawl through the drain into the kitchen, and then into the pantry, and there you will find cakes, ham, beef, cold chicken, roast pig, apple dumplings, and everything that your heart can wish." The wolf did not want to be asked twice, so that very night he went to the house and crawled through the drain into the kitchen, and then into the pantry, and ate and drank there to his heart's content. As soon as he had had enough, he wanted to get away, but he had eaten so much that he could not get out by the same way he came in. This was just what Tom had reckoned upon, and now he began to set up a great shout, making all the noise he could. "Will you be easy?" said the wolf. "You'll awaken everybody in the house if you make such a clatter." "What's that to me?" said the little man. "You have had your frolic, now I've a mind to be merry myself." And he began singing and shouting as loud as he could. The woodman and his wife, being awakened by the noise, peeped through a crack in the door. But when they saw a wolf was there, you may well suppose that they were sadly frightened, and the woodman ran for his axe, and gave his wife a scythe. "Do you stay behind," said the woodman, "and when I have knocked him on the head, you must rip him up with the scythe." Tom heard all this, and cried out, "Father, father, I am here! The wolf has swallowed me." And his father said, "Heaven be praised! We have found our dear child again." And he told his wife not to use the scythe, for fear she should hurt him. Then he aimed a great blow, and struck the wolf on the head, and killed him on the spot. And when he was dead they cut open his body, and set Tommy free. "Ah," said the father, "what fears we have had for you!" "Yes, father," answered he, "I have travelled all over the world, I think, in one way or other, since we parted, and now I am very glad to come home, and get fresh air again." "Why, where have you been?" said his father. "I have been in a mouse-hole, in a snail-shell, and down a cow's throat, and in a wolf's belly, and yet here I am again, safe and sound." "Well," said they, "you are come back, and we will not sell you again for all the riches in the world." Then they hugged and kissed their dear little son, and gave him plenty to eat and drink, for he was very hungry, and then they fetched new clothes for him, for his old clothes had been quite spoiled on his journey. So Master Thumb stayed at home with his father and mother in peace, for though he had been so great a traveller, and had done and seen so many fine things, and was fond enough of telling the whole story, he always agreed that, after all, there's no place like home. End of Tom Thumb. From Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. By the side of a wood, in a country a long way off, ran a fine stream of water, and upon the stream there stood a mill. The miller's house was close by, and the miller, you must know, had a very beautiful daughter. She was, moreover, very shrewd and clever, and the miller was so proud of her that he one day told the king of the land, who used to come and hunt in the wood, that his daughter could spin gold out of straw. Now this king was very fond of money, and when he heard the miller's boast, his greediness was raised, and he sent for the girl to be brought before him. Then he led her to a chamber in his palace, where there was a great heap of straw, and gave her a spinning wheel, and said, "All this must be spun into gold before morning, as you love your life." It was in vain that the poor maiden said that it was only a silly boast of her father, for that she could do no such thing as spin straw into gold. The chamber door was locked, and she was left alone. She sat down in one corner of the room and began to bewail her hard fate. But suddenly the door opened, and a droll-looking little man hobbled in, and said, "Good morrow to you, my good lass. What are you weeping for?" "Alas," said she, "I must spin this straw into gold, and I know not how." "What will you give me," said the hobgoblin, "to do it for you?" "My necklace," replied the maiden. He took her at her word, and sat himself down to the wheel, and whistled and sang, "Round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold." And round about the wheel went merrily. The work was quickly done, and the straw was all spun into gold. When the king came and saw this, he was greatly astonished and pleased, but his heart grew still more greedy of gain, and he shut up the poor miller's daughter again with a fresh task. Then she knew not what to do, and sat down once more to weep, but the dwarf soon opened the door, and said, "What will you give me to do your task?" "The ring on my finger," said she. So her little friend took the ring, and began to work at the wheel again, and whistled and sang, "Round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold." Till long before morning all was done again. King was greatly delighted to see all this glittering treasure, but still he had not enough. So he took the miller's daughter to a yet larger heap, and said, "All this must be spun to-night, and if it is, you shall be my queen." As soon as she was alone, that dwarf came in, and said, "What will you give me to spin gold for you this third time?" "I have nothing left," said she. "Then say you will give me," said the little man, "the first little child that you may have when you are queen." "That may never be," thought the miller's daughter, and as she knew no other way to get her task done, she said she would do what he asked. Round went the wheel again to the old song, and the manikin once more spun the heap into gold. The king came in the morning, and finding all he wanted, was forced to keep his word. So he married the miller's daughter, and she really became queen. At the birth of her first child she was very glad, and forgot the dwarf and what she had said. But one day he came into her room, where she was sitting playing with her baby, and put her in mind of it. Then she grieved sorely at her misfortune, and said she would give him all the wealth of the kingdom if he would let her off, but in vain, till at last her tears softened him, and he said, "I will give you 3 days' grace, and if during that time you tell me my name, you shall keep your child." Now the queen lay awake all night, thinking of all the odd names that she had ever heard, and she sent messengers all over the land to find out new ones. The next day the little man came, and she began with Timothy, Ichabod, Benjamin, Jeremiah, and all the names she could remember. But to all and each of them he said, "Madam, that's not my name." The second day she began with all the comical names she had heard of, Bandy-legs, Hunchback, Crookshanks, and so on. But the little gentleman still said to every one of them, "Madam, that is not my name." The third day one of the messengers came back and said, "I have travelled 2 days without hearing of any other names, but yesterday, as I was climbing a high hill, among the trees of the forest where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, I saw a little hut, and before the hut burnt a fire, and round about the fire a funny little dwarf was dancing upon one leg and singing, 'Merrily the feast I'll make, to-day I'll brew, to-morrow bake, merrily I'll dance and sing, for next day will a stranger bring. Little does my lady dream, Rumpelstiltskin is my name.' When the king heard this, she jumped for joy, and as soon as her little friend came, she sat down upon her throne, and called all her court round to enjoy the fun. And the nurse stood by her side with the baby in her arms, as if it was quite ready to be given up. Then the little man began to chuckle at the thought of having the poor child to take home with him to his hut in the woods, and he cried out, "Now, lady, what is my name?" "Is it John?" asked she. "No, madam." "Is it Tom?" "No, madam." "Is it Jemmy?" "It is not." "Can your name be Rumpelstiltskin?" said the lady slyly. "Some witch told you that! Some witch told you that!" cried the little man, and dashed his right foot in a rage so deep into the floor that he was forced to lay hold of it with both hands to pull it out. Then he made the best of his way off, while the nurse laughed and the baby crowed, and all the court jeered at him for having had so much trouble for nothing, and said, "We wish you a very good morning and a merry feast, Mr. Rumpelstiltskin." End of Rumpelstiltskin. Clever Gretel, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. There once was a cook named Gretel, who wore shoes with red heels, and when she walked out with them on, she turned herself this way and that, was quite happy, and thought, "You certainly are a pretty girl." And when she came home she drank, in her gladness of heart, a draught of wine, and as wine excites a desire to eat, she tasted the best of whatever she was cooking until she was satisfied, and said, "The cook must know what the food is like." It came to pass that the master one day said to her, "Gretel, there is a guest coming this evening. Prepare me 2 fowls very daintily." "I will see to it, master," answered Gretel. She killed 2 fowls, scalded them, plucked them, put them on a spit, and towards evening set them before the fire, that they might roast. The fowls began to turn brown, and were nearly ready, but the guest had not yet arrived. Then Gretel called out to her master, "If the guest does not come, I must take the fowls away from the fire, but it will be a sin and a shame if they are not eaten the moment they are at their juiciest." The master said, "I will run myself and fetch the guest." When the master had turned his back, Gretel laid the spit with the fowls on one side, and thought, "Standing so long by the fire there makes one sweat and thirsty. Who knows when they will come? Meanwhile I will run into the cellar and take a drink." She ran down, set a jug, and said, "God bless it for you, Gretel," and took a good drink, and thought that wine should flow on and should not be interrupted, and took yet another hearty draught. Then she went and put the fowls down again to the fire, basted them, and drove the spit merrily round. But as the roast meat smelt so good, Gretel thought, something might be wrong, it ought to be tasted. She touched it with her finger, and said, "Ah, how good fowls are! It certainly is a sin and a shame that they are not eaten at the right time." She ran to the window to see if the master was not coming with his guest, but she saw no one, and went back to the fowls, and thought, "One of the wings is burning. I had better take it off and eat it." So she cut it off, ate it, and enjoyed it, and when she had done, she thought, "The other must go down too, or else master will observe that something is missing." When the 2 wings were eaten, she went and looked for her master, and did not see him. It suddenly occurred to her, "Who knows? They are perhaps not coming at all, and have turned in somewhere." Then she said, "Well, Gretel, enjoy yourself. One fowl has been cut into. Take another drink, and eat it up entirely. When it is eaten you will have some peace. Why should God's good gifts be spoiled?" So she ran into the cellar again, took an enormous drink, and ate up the 1 chicken in great glee. When one of the chickens was swallowed down, and still her master did not come, Gretel looked at the other, and said, "What one is, the other should be likewise. The 2 go together. What's right for the one is right for the other. I think if I were to take another draught, it would do me no harm." So she took another hearty drink, and let the 2nd chicken follow the first. While she was making the most of it, the master came and cried, "Hurry up, Gretel, the guest is coming directly after me." "Yes, sir, I will soon serve up," answered Gretel. Meantime the master looked to see that the table was properly laid, and took the great knife wherewith he was going to carve the chickens, and sharpened it on the steps. Presently the guest came, and knocked politely and courteously at the house door. Gretel ran and looked to see who was there, and when she saw the guest, she put her finger to her lips, and said, "Hush, hush! Go away as quickly as you can. If my master catches you, it will be the worse for you. He certainly did ask you to supper, but his intention is to cut off your 2 ears. Just listen how he is sharpening the knife for it." The guest heard the sharpening, and hurried down the steps again as fast as he could. Gretel was not idle. She ran screaming to her master, and cried, "You have invited a fine guest." "Why, Gretel, what do you mean by that?" "Yes," said she, "he has taken the chickens which I was just going to serve up off the dish, and has run away with them." "That's a nice trick," said her master, and lamented the fine chickens. "If he had but left me 1, so that something remained for me to eat." He called to him to stop, but the guest pretended not to hear. Then he ran after him, with the knife still in his hand, crying, "Just 1, just 1," meaning that the guest should leave him just 1 chicken, and not take both. The guest, however, thought no otherwise than that he was to give up one of his ears, and ran as if fire were burning under him, in order to take them both with him. End of Clever Gretel. Man and His Grandson, from Grimm's Fairy Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. There was once a very old man, whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at table he could hardly hold a spoon, and split the broth upon the tablecloth, or let it run out of his mouth. His son and his son's wife were disgusted at this, so the old grandfather at last had to sit in the corner behind the stove, and they gave him his food in an earthenware bowl, and not even enough of it. And he used to look towards the table with his eyes full of tears. Once, too, his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. The young wife scolded him, but he said nothing, and only sighed. Then they brought him a wooden bowl for a few halfpence, out of which he had to eat. They were once sitting thus, when the little grandson of 4 years old began to gather together some bits of wood upon the ground. "What are you doing there?" asked the father. "I am making a little trough," answered the child, "for father and mother to eat out of when I am big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while, and presently began to cry. Then they took the old grandfather to the table, and henceforth always let him eat with them, and likewise said nothing if he did spill a little of anything. End of the Old Man and his Grandson. Little Peasant, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. There was a certain village wherein no one lived but really rich peasants, and just one poor one, whom they called the Little Peasant. He had not even so much as a cow, and still less money to buy one, and yet he and his wife did so wish to have one. One day he said to her, "Listen, I have a good idea. There is our gossip the carpenter. He shall make us a wooden calf, and paint it brown, so that it looks like any other, and in time it will certainly get big and be a cow." The woman also liked the idea, and their gossip the carpenter cut and planed the calf, and painted it as it ought to be, and made it with its head hanging down, as if it were eating. Next morning, when the cows were being driven out, the little peasant called the cowherd in, and said, "Look, I have a little calf here, but it is still small, and has to be carried." The cowherd said, "All right," and took it in his arms, and carried it to the pasture, and set it among the grass. The little calf always remained standing like one which was eating, and the cowherd said, "It will soon run by itself. Just look how it eats already." At night, when he was going to drive the herd home again, he said to the calf, "If you can stand there and eat your fill, you can also go on your 4 legs. I don't care to drag you home again in my arms." But the little peasant stood at his door and waited for his little calf, and when the cowherd drove the cows through the village, and the calf was missing, he inquired where it was. The cowherd answered, "It is still standing out there eating. It would not stop and come with us." But the little peasant said, "Oh, but I must have my beast back again." Then they went back to the meadow together, but some one had stolen the calf, and it was gone. The cowherd said, "It must have run away." The peasant, however, said, "Don't tell me that," and led the cowherd before the mayor, who, for his carelessness, condemned him to give the peasant a cow for the calf which had run away. And now the little peasant and his wife had the cow for which they had so long wished, and they were heartily glad, but they had no food for it, and could give it nothing to eat, so it soon had to be killed. They salted the flesh, and the peasant went into the town and wanted to sell the skin there, so that he might buy a new calf with the proceeds. On the way he passed by a mill, and there sat a raven with broken wings, and out of pity he took him and wrapped him in the skin. But as the weather grew so bad, and there was a storm of rain and wind, he could go no farther, and turned back to the mill and begged for shelter. The miller's wife was alone in the house, and said to the peasant, "Lay yourself on the straw there," and gave him a slice of bread and cheese. The peasant ate it and lay down with his skin beside him, and the woman thought, "He is tired and has gone asleep." In the meantime came the parson. The miller's wife received him well, and said, "My husband is out, so we will have a feast." The peasant listened, and when he heard them talk about feasting, he was vexed that he had been forced to make shift with a slice of bread and cheese. Then the woman served up 4 different things: roast meat, salad, cakes, and wine. Just as they were about to sit down and eat, there was a knocking outside. The woman said, "Oh, heavens! It is my husband!" She quickly hid the roast meat inside the tile stove, the wine under the pillow, the salad on the bed, the cakes under it, and the parson in the closet on the porch. Then she opened the door for her husband, and said, "Thank heaven you are back again. There is such a storm, it looks as if the world were coming to an end." The miller saw the peasant lying on the straw, and asked, "What is that fellow doing there?" "Ah," said the wife, "the poor knave came in the storm and rain and begged for shelter, so I gave him a bit of bread and cheese, and showed him where the straw was." The man said, "I have no objection, but be quick and get me something to eat." The woman said, "But I have nothing but bread and cheese." "I am contented with anything," replied the husband. "So far as I am concerned, bread and cheese will do," and looked at the peasant and said, "Come and eat some more with me." The peasant did not require to be invited twice, but got up and ate. After this the miller saw the skin in which the raven was lying on the ground, and asked, "What have you there?" The peasant answered, "I have a soothsayer inside it." "Can he foretell anything to me?" said the miller. "Why not?" answered the peasant. "But he only says 4 things, and the 5th he keeps to himself." The miller was curious, and said, "Let him foretell something for once." Then the peasant pinched the raven's head, so that it croaked and made a noise like "Caw! Caw!" The miller said, "What did he say?" The peasant answered, "In the first place, he says that there is some wine hidden under the pillow." "Bless me!" cried the miller, and went there and found the wine. "Now go on," said he. The peasant made the raven croak again, and said, "In the second place, he says that there is some roast meat in the tile stove." "Upon my word!" cried the miller, and went thither and found the roast meat. The peasant made the raven prophesy still more, and said, "Thirdly, he says that there is some salad on the bed." "That would be a fine thing!" cried the miller, and went there and found the salad. At last the peasant pinched the raven once more till he croaked, and said, "Fourthly, he says that there are some cakes under the bed." "That would be a fine thing!" cried the miller, and looked there and found the cakes. And now the two sat down to the table together, but the miller's wife was frightened to death, and went to bed and took all the keys with her. The miller would have liked much to know the 5th, but the little peasant said, "First we will quickly eat the 4 things, for the 5th is something bad." So they ate, and after that they bargained how much the miller was to give for the 5th prophecy, until they agreed on 300 thalers. Then the peasant once more pinched the raven's head till he croaked loudly. The miller asked, "What did he say?" The peasant replied, "He says that the devil is hiding outside there in the closet on the porch." The miller said, "The devil must go out," and opened the house door. Then the woman was forced to give up the keys, and the peasant unlocked the closet. The parson ran out as fast as he could, and the miller said, "It was true. I saw the black rascal with my own eyes."
A peasant, however, made off next morning by daybreak with the 300 thalers. At home the small peasant gradually launched out. He built a beautiful house, and the peasant said, "The small peasant has certainly been to the place where golden snow falls, and people carry the gold home in shovels." Then the small peasant was brought before the mayor, and bidden to say from whence his wealth came. He answered, "I sold my cow's skin in the town for 300 thalers." When the peasants heard that, they too wished to enjoy this great profit, and ran home, killed all their cows, and stripped off their skins in order to sell them in the town to the greatest advantage. The mayor, however, said, "But my servant must go first." When she came to the merchant in the town, he did not give her more than 2 thalers for a skin, and when the others came, he did not give them so much, and said, "What can I do with all these skins?" Then the peasants were vexed that the small peasant should have thus outwitted them, wanted to take vengeance on him, and accused him of this treachery before the mayor. The innocent little peasant was unanimously sentenced to death, and was to be rolled into the water in a barrel pierced full of holes. He was led forth, and a priest was brought who was to say a mass for his soul. The others were all obliged to retire to a distance, and when the peasant looked at the priest, he recognized the man who had been with the miller's wife. He said to him, "I set you free from the closet, set me free from the barrel." At this same moment up came, with a flock of sheep, the very shepherd whom the peasant knew had long been wishing to be mayor, so he cried with all his might, "No, I will not do it. If the whole world insists on it, I will not do it." The shepherd, hearing that, came up to him and asked, "What are you about? What is it that you will not do?" The peasant said, "They want to make me mayor if I will but put myself in the barrel, but I will not do it." The shepherd said, "If nothing more than that is needful in order to be mayor, I would get into the barrel at once." The peasant said, "If you will get in, you will be mayor." The shepherd was willing, and got in, and the peasant shut the top down on him. Then he took the shepherd's flock for himself, and drove it away. The parson went to the crowd and declared that the mass had been said. Then they came and rolled the barrel towards the water. When the barrel began to roll, the shepherd cried, "I am quite willing to be mayor." They believed no otherwise than that it was the peasant who was saying this, and answered, "That is what we intend, but first you shall look about you a little down below there." And they rolled the barrel down into the water. After the peasants went home, and as they were entering the village, the small peasant also came quietly in, driving a flock of sheep and looking quite contented. Then the peasants were astonished, and said, "Peasant, from whence do you come? Have you come out of the water?" "Yes, truly," replied the peasant. "I sank down, deep down, until at last I got to the bottom. I pushed the bottom out of the barrel and crept out, and there were pretty meadows on which a number of lambs were feeding, and from thence I brought this flock away with me." Said the peasants, "Are there any more there?" "Oh, yes," said he, "more than I could want." Then the peasants made up their minds that they too would fetch some sheep for themselves, a flock apiece, but the mayor said, "I come first." So they went to the water together, and just then there were some of the small fleecy clouds in the blue sky, which are called little lambs, and they were reflected in the water. Whereupon the peasants cried, "We already see the sheep down below." The mayor pressed forward and said, "I will go down first and look about me, and if things promise well I'll call you." So he jumped in. Splash went the water. It sounded as if he were calling them, and the whole crowd plunged in after him as one man. Then the entire village was dead.
and the small peasant, as sole heir, became a rich man. End of The Little Peasant. Dick and Catherine, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. There once was a man called Frederick. He had a wife whose name was Catherine, and they had not long been married. One day Frederick said, "Kate, I am going to work in the fields. When I come back I shall be hungry, so let me have something nice cooked, and a good draught of ale." "Very well," said she, "it shall all be ready." When dinner-time drew nigh, Catherine took a nice steak, which was all the meat she had, and put it on the fire to fry. The steak soon began to look brown and to crackle in the pan, and Catherine stood by with a fork and turned it. Then she said to herself, "The steak is almost ready. I may as well go to the cellar for the ale." So she left the pan on the fire, and took a large jug, and went into the cellar and tapped the ale-cask. The beer ran into the jug, and Catherine stood looking on. At last it popped into her head, "The dog is not shut up. He may be running away with the steak. That's well thought of." So up she ran from the cellar, and sure enough the rascally cur had got the steak in his mouth, and was making off with it. Away ran Catherine, and away ran the dog across the field. But he ran faster than she, and stuck close to the steak. "It's all gone, and what can't be cured must be endured," said Catherine. So she turned round, and as she had run a good way and was tired, she walked home leisurely to cool herself. Now all this time the ale was running too, for Catherine had not turned the cock, and when the jug was full the liquor ran upon the floor till the cask was empty. When she got to the cellar stairs she saw what had happened. "My stars!" said she, "what shall I do to keep Frederick from seeing all this slopping about?" So she thought a while, and at last remembered that there was a sack of fine meal bought at the last fair, and that if she sprinkled this over the floor it would suck up the ale nicely. "What a lucky thing," said she, "that we kept that meal! We have now a good use for it." So away she went for it, but she managed to set it down just upon the great jug full of beer, and upset it, and thus all the ale that had been saved was set swimming on the floor also. "Ah, well," said she, "when one goes another may as well follow." Then she strewed the meal all about the cellar, and was quite pleased with her cleverness, and said, "How very neat and clean it looks." At noon Frederick came home. "Now, wife," cried he, "what have you for dinner?" "Oh, Frederick," answered she, "I was cooking you a steak, but while I went down to draw the ale the dog ran away with it, and while I ran after him the ale ran out, and when I went to dry up the ale with the sack of meal that we got at the fair, I upset the jug. But now the cellar is quite dry, and looks so clean." "Kate, Kate," said he, "how could you do all this? Why did you leave the steak to fry and the ale to run, and then spoil all the meal?" "Why, Frederick," said she, "I did not know I was doing wrong. You should have told me before." The husband thought to himself, "If my wife manages matters thus, I must look sharp myself." Now he had a good deal of gold in the house, so he said to Catherine, "What pretty yellow buttons these are! I shall put them into a box and bury them in the garden, but take care that you never go near or meddle with them." "No, Frederick," said she, "that I never will." As soon as he was gone there came by some pedlars with earthenware plates and dishes, and they asked her whether she would buy. "Oh, dear me! "I should like to buy very much, but I have no money. If you had any use for yellow buttons, I might deal with you." "Yellow buttons," said they. "Let us have a look at them." "Go into the garden and dig where I tell you, and you will find the yellow buttons. I dare not go myself." So the rogues went, and when they found what these yellow buttons were, they took them all away, and left her plenty of plates and dishes. Then she set them all about the house for a show, and when Frederick came back, he cried out, "Kate, what have you been doing?" "See," said she, "I have bought all these with your yellow buttons. But I did not touch them myself. The pedlars went themselves and dug them up." "Wife, wife," said Frederick, "what a pretty piece of work you have made! Those yellow buttons were all my money. How came you to do such a thing?" "Why," answered she, "I did not know there was any harm in it. You should have told me." Catherine stood musing for a while, and at last said to her husband, "Hark ye, Frederick, we will soon get the gold back. Let us run after the thieves." "Well, we will try," answered he, "but take some butter and cheese with you, that we may have something to eat by the way." "Very well," said she, and they set out, and as Frederick walked the fastest, he left his wife some way behind. "It does not matter," thought she. "When we turn back, I shall be so much nearer home than he." Presently she came to the top of a hill, down the side of which there was a road so narrow that the cart-wheels always chafed the trees on each side as they passed. "Ah, see now," said she, "how they have bruised and wounded those poor trees. They will never get well." So she took pity on them, and made use of the butter to grease them all, so that the wheels might not hurt them so much. While she was doing this kind office, one of her cheeses fell out of the basket, and rolled down the hill. Catherine looked, but could not see where it had gone. So she said, "Well, I suppose the other will go the same way and find you. He has younger legs than I have." Then she rolled the other cheese after it, and away it went, nobody knows where, down the hill. But she said she supposed that they knew the road, and would follow her, and she could not stay there all day waiting for them. At last she overtook Frederick, who desired her to give him something to eat. Then she gave him the dry bread. "Where are the butter and cheese?" said he. "Oh," answered she, "I used the butter to grease those poor trees that the wheels chafed so, and one of the cheeses ran away, so I sent the other after it to find it, and I suppose they are both on the road together somewhere." "What a goose you are to do such silly things!" said the husband. "How can you say so?" said she. "I am sure you never told me not." They ate the dry bread together, and Frederick said, "Kate, I hope you locked the door safe when you came away." "No," answered she, "you did not tell me." "Then go home and do it now, before we go any farther," said Frederick, "and bring with you something to eat." Catherine did as he told her, and thought to herself by the way, "Frederick wants something to eat, but I don't think he's very fond of butter and cheese. I'll bring him a bag of fine nuts, and the vinegar, for I have often seen him take some." When she reached home, she bolted the back door, but the front door she took off the hinges, and said, "Frederick told me to lock the door, but surely it can nowhere be so safe if I take it with me." So she took her time by the way, and when she overtook her husband, she cried out, "There, Frederick, there is the door itself. You may watch it as carefully as you please." "Alas, alas!" said he, "what a clever wife I have! I sent you to make the house fast, and you took the door away, so that everybody may go in and out as they please. However, as you have brought the door, you shall carry it about with you for your pains." "Very well," answered she. "I'll carry the door. But I'll not carry the nuts and vinegar bottle also. That would be too much of a load. So, if you please, I'll fasten them to the door." Frederick, of course, made no objection to that plan, and they set off into the wood to look for the thieves, but they could not find them, and when it grew dark they climbed up into a tree to spend the night there. Scarcely were they up, but who should come by but the very rogues they were looking for. They were in truth great rascals, and belonged to that class of people who find things before they are lost. They were tired, so they sat down and made a fire under the very tree where Frederick and Catherine were. Frederick slipped down on the other side and picked up some stones. Then he climbed up again, and tried to hit the thieves on the head with them, but they only said, "It must be near morning, for the wind shakes the fir apples down." Catherine, who had the door on her shoulder, began to be very tired, but she thought it was the nuts upon it that were so heavy, so she said softly, "Frederick, I must let the nuts go." "No," answered he, "not now. They will discover us." "I can't help that. They must go." "Well, then, make haste and throw them down, if you will." Then away rattled the nuts down among the boughs, and one of the thieves cried, "Bless me, it is hailing." A little while after, Catherine thought the door was still very heavy, so she whispered to Frederick, "I must throw the vinegar down." "Pray don't," answered he. "It will discover us." "I can't help it," said she. "Go it must." So she poured all the vinegar down, and the thieves said, "What a heavy dew there is!" At last it popped into Catherine's head that it was the door itself that was so heavy all the time, so she whispered, "Frederick, I must throw the door down soon." But he begged and prayed her not to do so, for he was sure it would betray them. "Here goes, however," said she, and down went the door with such a clatter upon the thieves that they cried out, "Murder!" and, not knowing what was coming, ran away as fast as they could, and left all the gold. So when Frederick and Catherine came down, there they found all their money, safe and sound. End of Frederick and Catherine. Sweetheart Roland, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Edgar Taylor and Marian Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. There was once upon a time a woman who was a real witch, and had 2 daughters, one ugly and wicked, and this one she loved because she was her own daughter, and one beautiful and good, and this one she hated because she was her step-daughter. The step-daughter once had a pretty apron, which the other fancied so much that she became envious, and told her mother that she must and would have that apron. "Be quiet, my child," said the old woman, "and you shall have it. Your step-sister has long deserved death. To-night, when she is asleep, I will come and cut her head off. Only be careful that you are at the far side of the bed, and push her well to the front." It would have been all over with the poor girl, if she had not just then been standing in a corner, and heard everything. All day long she dared not go out of doors, and when bedtime had come, the witch's daughter got into bed first, so as to lie at the far side, but when she was asleep, the other pushed her gently to the front, and took for herself the place at the back, close by the wall. In the night the old woman came creeping in. She held an axe in her right hand, and felt with her left to see if anything were lying at the outside, and then she grasped the axe with both hands, and cut her own child's head off. When she had gone away, the girl got up and went to her sweetheart, who was called Roland, and knocked at his door. When he came out, she said to him, "Listen, dearest Roland, we must fly in all haste. My stepmother wanted to kill me, but she has struck her own child. When daylight comes, and she sees what she has done, we shall be lost." "But," said Roland, "I counsel you first to take away her magic wand, or we cannot escape her if she pursues us." The maiden fetched the magic wand, and she took the dead girl's head and dropped 3 drops of blood on the ground, one in front of the bed, one in the kitchen, and one on the stairs. Then she hurried away with her lover. When the old witch got up next morning, she called her daughter, and wanted to give her the apron, but she did not come. Then the witch cried, "Where are you?" "Here, on the steps. I am sweeping," answered the first drop of blood. The old woman went out, but saw no one on the stairs, and cried again, "Where are you?" "Here in the kitchen. I am warming myself," cried the second drop of blood. She went into the kitchen, but found no one. Then she cried again, "Where are you?" "Ah, here in the bed. I am sleeping," cried the third drop of blood. She went into the room to the bed. What did she see there? Her own child, whose head she had cut off, bathed in her blood. The witch fell into a passion, sprang to the window, and as she could look forth quite far into the world, she perceived her stepdaughter hurrying away with her sweetheart Roland. "That shall not help you," cried she. "Even if you have got a long way off, you shall not escape me." She put on her many-league boots, in which she covered an hour's walk at every step, and it was not long before she overtook them. The girl, however, when she saw the old woman striding towards her, changed, with her magic wand, her sweetheart Roland into a lake, and herself into a duck, swimming in the middle of it. The witch placed herself on the shore, threw bread-crumbs in, and went in endless trouble to entice the duck. But the duck did not let herself be enticed, but the old woman had to go home at night as she had come. At this the girl and her sweetheart Roland resumed their natural shapes again, and they walked on the whole night until daybreak. Then the maiden changed herself into a beautiful flower which stood in the midst of a briar hedge, and her sweetheart Roland into a fiddler. It was not long before the witch came striding up towards them, and said to the musician, "Dear musician, may I pluck that beautiful flower for myself?" "Oh, yes," he replied, "I will play to you while you do it." As she was hastily creeping into the hedge, and was just going to pluck the flower, knowing perfectly well who the flower was, he began to play, and whether she would or not, she was forced to dance, for it was a magical dance. The faster he played, the more violent springs was she forced to make, and the thorns tore her clothes from her body, and pricked her and wounded her till she bled, and as she did not stop, she had to dance till she lay dead on the ground. As they were now set free, Roland said, "Now I will go to my father and arrange for the wedding." "Then in the meantime I will stay here and wait for you," said the girl, "and that no one may recognize me, I will change myself into a red stone landmark." Then Roland went away, and the girl stood like a red landmark in the field and waited for her beloved. But when Roland got home, he fell into the snares of another, who so fascinated him that he forgot the maiden. The poor girl remained there a long time, but at length, as he did not return at all, she was sad, and changed herself into a flower, and thought, "Some one will surely come this way and trample me down." It befell, however, that a shepherd kept his sheep in the field, and saw the flower, and as it was so pretty, plucked it, took it with him, and laid it away in his chest. From that time forth strange things happened in the shepherd's house. When he arose in the morning, all the work was already done, The room was swept, the table and benches cleaned, the fire in the hearth was lighted, and the water was fetched, and at noon, when he came home, the table was laid, and a good dinner served. He could not conceive how this came to pass, for he never saw a human being in his house, and no one could have concealed himself in it. He was certainly pleased with this good attendance, but still at last he was so afraid that he went to a wise woman and asked for her advice. The wise woman said, "There is some enchantment behind it. Listen very early some morning if anything is moving in the room, and if you see anything, no matter what it is, throw a white cloth over it, and then the magic will be stopped." The shepherd did as she bade him, and next morning, just as day dawned, he saw the chest opened and the flower come out. Swiftly he sprang towards it, and threw a white cloth over it. Instantly the transformation came to an end, and a beautiful girl stood before him, who admitted to him that she had been the flower, and that up to this time she had attended to his housekeeping. She told him her story, and, as she pleased him, he asked her if she would marry him, but she answered no, for she wanted to remain faithful to her sweetheart Roland, although he had deserted her. Nevertheless, she promised not to go away, but to continue keeping house for the shepherd. And now the time drew near when Roland's wedding was to be celebrated, and then, according to an old custom in the country, it was announced that all the girls were to be present at it, and sing in honor of the bridal pair. When the faithful maiden heard of this, she grew so sad that she thought her heart would break, and she would not go thither, but the other girls came and took her. When it came her time to sing, she stepped back, until at last she was the only one left, and then she could not refuse. But when she began her song and it reached Roland's ears, he sprang up and cried, "I know the voice. That is the true bride. I will have no other." Everything he had forgotten, and which had vanished from his mind, had suddenly come home again to his heart. Then the faithful maiden held her wedding with her sweetheart Roland, and grief came to an end, and joy began. End of Sweetheart Roland.